Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, White Zulu, and I want to welcome you to another chapter of, another chapter of Okavango Diary. And I hope you're enjoying these readings. I want to welcome you all. And if you are enjoying them, please share or press the like button or whatever people do if they want to. I'm sorry, I'm a bit Diomaka today. I haven't got any words in front of me to read, so I'm doing this off the cuff. However, this is a greeting to you all and a welcome, and I hope that you enjoy these chapters that I'm reading out. They go out twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays, if all goes well. And enjoy them, and thank you so much for listening to them. Share them around. Thank you, and goodbye. Sunday, the 1st of July. The plane suddenly circled and dived towards a patch of sand. We bounced in and skidded to a halt in front of a cluster of thorn trees. Martin stopped with only feet to spare. "This is your stop," said Martin abruptly. And on closer inspection, I saw a bakkie waiting. A middle-aged and slightly portly man walked towards the plane and handed the pilot the mail bag, a can of Coke, and a packet of sandwiches, in exchange for the mail bag we had brought up from Maun. "I'm Fred," he introduced himself. "I'm the relief manager here." And with that, I grabbed my bag and followed him to the bakkie. I chatted excitedly as I saw various animals and birds I'd recognized from all the time I'd spent in game reserves my entire life. Fred was impassive as he drove along a track meandering through the bush until we pulled up to the entrance of Tsaro, which had originally been a hunting lodge, with 8 thatched rondavels as guest accommodation. There was a very attractive thatched main building, which consisted of a small office and a long bar and sitting area, all exposed to expansive views of the bush and overlooking a long, wide and closely cropped green lawn which swept down the Kwai River, where a big pod of hippos lay in a large pool, semi-submerged or basking on the bank. The big dining area with a long table that could seat 20 people was on a raised platform, sheltered by a thatched roof open both front and back, and overlooking a waterhole which had spotlights shone on it at night. In the area between the dining room and the seating area was a square of grass and a sparkling blue swimming pool with sun lounges arranged around it. Behind the scenes was my domain, a big kitchen and 2 separate outbuildings, one full of deep freezers and fridges, and the other set aside for dry goods. Both were firmly padlocked, I noticed. "We have no guests in at the moment," explained Fred. "But if you don't mind, we've just received our month's supply of food and drink off the lorry, and it needs to be catalogued and then locked away." I was happy to oblige, and we tackled the mountain of boxes and packages, counting each tin package or carton by its weight in grams. Once it had all been ticked off, it was put away on the shelves, or into the freezers and fridges, the new fresh items at the back or the bottom, so as to rotate the stock. Mark, our host, part Belgian and part South African, who was the third member of our three-person white team, arrived from his afternoon sleep to take over the beverages, which included all the liquor needed to be itemized and put away in the bar. He was in his early 30s and as chatty as Fred hadn't been, and quite delightful. It was hard work, but I enjoyed doing it because it was a quick and easy way of learning where everything was. Fred then took me into the kitchen where all the staff were lined up and introduced me. These were from the local River Bushman tribe that lived in the village quite close by, and a few of them had a smattering of English. Regrettably, I had no Tswana at all, and unlike Xhosa, there was not a single word in that language that resembled Zulu. It felt odd speaking English to Africans, but there was no other choice. So, with smiles and nods and pointing, we had a look at all the menus for the week. The whole system had been designed to repeat itself every week, as no guest could ever afford to stay longer than 3 days, and 5 days at a very maximum at either camp. Since there were no guests to feed on that night or the next day, it was just the three of us, so Fred had decided we would have homemade fish and chips. I was shown to my quarters, which were set aside from the permanent manager and his wife, who were on leave for a month. It was a very basic hut right at the furthest end of the camp, along a narrow path through shrubberies to hide its ugliness. It backed onto the garage and workshop. After dropping my bag onto the bed, I reported back to the main building to find Fred and Mark sitting comfortably at the bar, having a drink and watching the hippos climb out of the Kwai River about 100 yards away down the lawn and begin to graze in the cooling evening air. There was a small herd of lechwe. These are a smallish, very rare antelope, larger than the impala, and related to the reedbuck family, with a slightly shaggy, bright chestnut coat, white underparts, and slender lyrate horns, also grazing peacefully. That's why the lawns are so well mowed, explained Mark. Those hippos will crop the grass right down to Bowling Green standards. But on the other hand, when you go to bed, you'd better watch out for them, as they do wander throughout the camp and can charge you. I do hope you'd brought a good strong torch. I hadn't, just a weak little twin-cell plastic one. But he offered to lend me one until I could order a proper mag light from Maun. After supper, one of the male guides escorted me back to my quarters. There was no lock on the door, but I closed it firmly, noticing that all the sand around my hut had been carefully raked flat with the rush broom. As I flopped exhausted onto my bed and kicked my sandals off, the overhead light bulb flickered and died. Fred had turned the generator off, and so I lit a candle to get undressed, wash, and fall asleep, having set my alarm for 6:45 the next morning. The next thing I sat bolt upright as a lion roared from what was, I felt, just outside my door. My fillings actually rattled, and my rib cage vibrated as roar after roar filled the pitch-black night. I was so tired that I actually fell asleep in mid-roar. My alarm clock woke me as it was just getting light, and I stepped into the ensuite shower only to find the water was stone cold. After washing my face and getting dressed, I opened my wooden door very cautiously and peeped out as it was still half light of winter dawn. All around my hut, including right up to the doorstep, were huge lion pug marks, deep in the sand. There was other spoor as well, hyena, and what could have been a black-backed jackal, as I'd seen a couple of them trotting about their business just outside the camp on the way from the airstrip. I reported to the office and told Fred that my water was cold. "Oh, gas cylinder needs changing. I'll get that done for you today," he explained. And then we set about checking through the incoming guest list to see who was arriving. There was a big whiteboard where we wrote the name of the aircraft, the time of arrival, and the names and numbers of guests coming in. These were radio-upped from Maun head office, who did all the bookings. I discovered an ancient computer with a dot matrix printer at a desk, which nobody used. Both Fred and Mark were computer illiterate, so I appropriated the desk for myself and began my diary. Monday, 2nd of July, 1997, 7 a.m. Lions have been roaring all night, with hyenas giggling as well. I also heard dogs barking from Kwai village, a small Tswana settlement about 3 kilometers from the lodge, where all our staff live, and a donkey braying. Went to open up the laundry to allow the housekeeping staff to get the sheets, towels, soap, and washing powder out for the day. And on my way back, I met Fred scurrying towards the front of the camp carrying a pair of binoculars. Apparently one of the staff in the camp had seen a leopard. We now had 2 guests, and I hopped with them into the Hilux bakkie, and with Jonathan, a Botswana guide, at the wheel, we drove cautiously over the short grass in front of the camp. 2 lionesses were lying there and gave us a perfect view as they both got up and strolled into the longer grass near the river and disappeared. At breakfast, the guides told us that a donkey had been killed by lions that night. This was not the first time this has happened. The Kwai and Moremi areas were declared a no-stock area some time ago and proclaimed as a wildlife preserve by the Nature Conservation Department of the Botswana government. Nevertheless, the villagers brought in about 9 or 10 donkeys. When the first donkey was killed by lions, the villagers asked the game guards in the Moremi Game Reserve permission to shoot the donkeys. Shoot the lion, since the guards also live in the village and probably owned some of the donkeys. They reluctantly agreed. Unfortunately, the lion was only wounded, possibly deliberately by their shots, and escaped into the Moremi Reserve, where the following morning wildlife authorities were called in and dispatched it properly. It appears that no amount of education will persuade the local people that live lions, and for that matter, Elephants, leopards, buffalo and rhinos bring in far more money from tourism than income from the odd donkey or lion skin. We are hoping no more lions will be shot after last night's escapades. At midday, the day was still and baking hot at 50 degrees centigrade. The two guests were out on a game drive, and the camp was quiet, apart from bird song. 6 young bull elephants materialized at the waterhole, a few meters from the dining area. They were so quiet that, as I was sitting there, checking the menu plan, and happened to glance in that direction, that I saw them. Some had even been in the water, judging from their wet feet. I called Fred, who was in the office close by, quietly, and he ran to get his camera. As he was taking photos, and I was watching mesmerized, as they were so close, only meters away, the 6 huge animals drifted off just as silently as they had arrived. It is amazing that such enormous 5-ton animals can move so quietly and so fast. 5 minutes later, there was no trace of them, and no one would have believed us. That night, during dinner, 2 hyenas also came to drink from the waterhole, which is floodlit after dark. Our 2 lady guests, Swiss Germans from Zurich, left straight after lunch. They had been with us for 4 nights, which is quite a long time to try and keep them entertained. Fortunately, they were so interested in the game viewing and conservation in general that we hardly saw them. They couldn't have been easier and more pleasant and interesting to talk to. Both were very well travelled and spoke excellent English. At 2 p.m., a family of 4 Swiss Germans flew in for 3 nights. Otto, the father, has some English and tries very hard to communicate. The mum and 2 kids, teenage son and slightly younger daughter, only speak German. All were very pleasant. This was their first visit to Africa, but none of the 3 of us speak any German. So Otto translated everything for them. Tuesday, 3rd of July. Lions were roaring during the early hours of the morning, so loudly that the room seemed to vibrate. We think it's a coalition of 4 or 5 males called the Brothers, who have been in this area for a while now. Maybe they're calling to the 2 lionesses we saw yesterday morning. I found hyena pug marks in the dust all around the door of my hut. They sniff quietly around the lodge every night, looking for anything chewable. We announced our meals by drumbeat. The waitress, Jane, who's tall and slim and very black, dresses in an elegant long outfit made of a very pretty soft floral material. At 8 p.m. she beats a tribal drum for dinner, which the guests love and find fascinating. But I'm always amused by the way she whips the drum into the kitchen straight afterwards. This is because hyenas have eaten the skin off that drum quite a few times in the past, if we left it out on the veranda. As we were eating breakfast, one of the housekeeping staff comes to tell me she's seen a lion in front of the camp. Everyone crept onto the front lawn with binoculars. It was a serval, one of Southern Africa's wildcats, just disappearing into the long grass. I have had a busy morning cleaning rats' droppings off the shelves in the dry goods storeroom and putting more rat eggs down. While I had the door open, a tree squirrel races in and snatches a pellet of rat eggs out of the jam jar lid on the floor, where I have carefully placed it, and runs out again before I could stop it. I was horrified. We have been having such a severe rat problem ever since I came to Tsaro Lodge. On several occasions, I have picked up a 6-pack carton of long life cream, only to find it completely empty. At the bottom of each 500 milliliter carton is a little hole, chewed there by rodent teeth. We staff have to account for every gram of food and drink that gets sent up to the camp. The heavy goods by Bedford truck and the perishable and lighter goods by air. We order in by the gram and allocate to each guest and staff member a food allowance measured down to the last gram. Anything that goes missing I have to account for, and now we are losing long life cream by the litre. I had asked Mound to send some rat eggs with the next order, and spent ages decanting it into little containers and tucking them into the corners underneath the shelves in the dry goods storeroom. Now I saw who the culprits were. Not rats at all, but African tree squirrels, those endearing little animals which make their nests in the thatch above our quarters, flit up and down the trees, twitching their tails and scolding us as we pass by, going about our business. I was mortified, not only having seen one grab a rat eggs pellet and make off with it, but wondering how many had already eaten them. I quickly retrieved all the little stashes of poison and decanted it all into a glass jar, screwed the lid on tightly, and told one of the staff members to bury it deep in the hole in which they burn the trash. I thought I might have got away with it until 5 days later, when an evil smell began to emanate from the thatch above the foyer. I kept quiet about my contribution to the pest control problem until the three of us were sitting in the office discussing an incoming group of guests, when out of the thatch and falling with a thud onto the stone floor came a dead squirrel, stiff with rigor mortis. Then I had to own up. "You should have told me about them," said Fred. "I would have shot them." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," I said to myself. Unfortunately, there have been no more dead squirrel incidences. We're having turkey pies for lunch, so I spent most of the morning supervising, as the previous week's turkey pies were awful, tasteless and in a thick, soggy, doughy pastry. This time I got Kutsi to put some garlic and herbs into the turkey filling, roll out the pastry more thinly, and brush it with beaten egg. Also, to bake them in a hotter oven. The Swiss family came back from their game drive, and Mark and I escorted them down to the hippo pool on foot in front of the camp, where the river was, so they could photograph the hippos. There were 6 hippos, 5 of them dozing on the bank opposite, in the hot midday sun, and another lying in the long grass on our side. The German boy had a very quick dip in the swimming pool, as the temperature is only 11 degrees in the water. Lunch was delicious. The pies were perfect and had a nice crisp pastry. The evening was quiet and peaceful, and everyone had an early night, as the German family were leaving after breakfast the next morning, and we were expecting a very large party of Swiss-French school teachers from Geneva. The group is called Cause Enseignant, and there are 12 of them, including their 2 guides. We also have 4 Italians called Berlusconi coming. The very maximum we can accommodate at one time is 16 guests, and somehow we had to find rooms for the 2 guides.
Hello everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my videos and my stories of my life. And I want to thank John Moslane for being what I call the sound engineer, but I'm sure there's a more professional word for it. However, faithful, and for 4 years now, I think, he has been here for me every Wednesday. Well, I think it's Wednesdays, but once a week to record 2 chapters of whichever book it is I'm reading. And without him, this couldn't be done. So a big thank you to John. Also, Sean van Vuren, we send the videos to him. Sorry, I'm not reading this. I'm just doing it off the cuff. And my brain is a bit Jumaka. And Sean uploads them to the YouTube channel where you can find them all in playlists. He does it beautifully. And I want to thank them both for all the help that they give me. Well, it's not help. They do everything for me. And it's a great asset. So also, I have a website called whitezulubook.com, obviously www in front of it, but you'll find it there. Quite easy to find. Johnny Clegg's called The White Zulu. Mine's called White Zulu. And you will find on my website, you'll find all kinds of photographs going way back to when my ancestors settled in the Cape, 1652. Well, not photographs of them, but descriptions. This photograph of my grandmother's wedding, and lovely, lovely photos of the farm we still own. My sister sent me a photograph this morning of the farm in midsummer, and she says how beautiful it's looking. I've had a lot of rain. So, just want to thank my helpers, John and Sean, to thank you all for listening, and also please share this with everybody else. Hit the like button and enjoy. Goodbye.